Let me start by saying that I'm a serious fly fisherman, so I have spent an awful lot of time in the Caribbean chasing the elusive bonefish, and I mean north of 40 trips. I've kind of lost count, but I am a fan. Um, what's interesting about this topic is that it has grown in importance significantly. The idea of being able to transition family businesses, privately held businesses, and family office has proven quite elusive. The data coming out of North America, I don't fully buy it, but it tends to say that roughly half of the wealth makes it the second generation and only 10% makes it to the third. I think that's a flawed statistic. I think it's closer to 20-25% makes it to the third generation. But either way, the ability to effectively handle family education, governance, and succession planning, despite a huge industry working on these topics, we're not doing a very good job based on that data. At the same time, we've had a global proliferation of wealth and increasing concentration of wealth. And it doesn't seem to matter what system, from a full-blown communist system to a full-blown libertarian system, the data looks pretty much the same. The wealth tends to be concentrated in a very similar group of people, regardless of the system. The question is, did you get there based on meritocracy, or did you get there based on thuggery democracy? Either way, the result ends up being the same. So because of this proliferation and the intent to, one, make a difference, two, benefit family and shareholders, there's been an increased focus on this topic. So as they've grown, as these family office structures have grown, these are simply another type of family business that has been established to help the family survive and get the next generation and perform all those functions: the succession, the staffing, the family education, the transition, and the education all along the way that will make it more likely to be effective and ultimately work. The question of why has there been this proliferation of family offices? Well, in addition to wealth concentrating and proliferating around the planet, to some extent, a number of technology inventions in this age, just like the Industrial Revolution, have led to a rising tide lifting all boats globally. That countries that couldn't afford telephone service skipped the landlines and went straight to cell, and now villages can call doctors that they had no access to 30, 40 years ago. Those transitions continue to escalate, and technology continues to frame the world. But what has emerged, whereas 25, 30 years ago, most people had never heard the term family office, it's now a well understood term. I literally gave seminars to 1,000 attorneys of a given state bar association. I would ask, how many know what a family office is? And 2 or 3 hands would go up in the entire room. Those days are gone. People have now realized that this is a compelling structure. And in particular, in the States, it has been the #1 most magnetic source of capital. It has beaten out the wirehouses, the RIAs, the broker-dealers, the trust companies, the banks. Most capital is moving toward these family offices, I think in large measure because people want an advocate. They want someone on their side of the table looking out for them to make sure that they are getting good information, that the data they're receiving has integrity, that the solutions they're implementing are the right solutions for them. And that does require a great deal of collaboration as well as expertise. Many of the things these families doing are nothing short of rare air. There are very few experts. There are very few people that know what they're doing in this space. So there's a lot of muddling around out there going on. And in fact, I've said this many times, the vast majority of family offices currently in existence are poorly structured, inefficient, attended with income tax leakage by current best-in-class standards. They simply aren't getting the job done, largely because they were established as single-purpose entities. All they were designed to do was transition the wealth or manage the money or help the family business. And they were not multi-disciplined, they were not multi-objective enterprises, and therein lies the mistake and the flaw in those old structures. If the structure hasn't been set up in the last 5 to 7 years, there's not a chance that it's a highly efficient enterprise. So many of these enterprises need to be fixed. We've probably restructured 50 to 60. We probably gutted another dozen and started over because there was just no saving them. They had so many compliance failures along the way. So right now, the family office, again, just another type of family enterprise, has emerged as the global best-in-class long-term wealth management and enhancement solution. That's pretty much acknowledged. And that's what's driving these enterprises. They are seeking to achieve business discipline, family governance, asset protection, premarital planning, and create income tax and estate tax, payroll tax, franchise tax, VAT tax, and other tax benefits. So they are truly multi-purpose entities. There are somewhere between, depending on whose descriptions you believe, 35 to 40 services that a typical family office could provide. In fact, most provide closer to a dozen services, 12 to 15, on average. They're not trying to do everything. And in fact, in the last 20 years, the trends toward outsourcing have escalated. More and more family offices are outsourcing activities. The number one activity outsourced is investment advisory. Number two, legal and accounting. So they realize that it's hard to have enough investment people on your own, even a multi-billionaire family office. How many A players can you afford? These are seven-figure people. How many analysts can you have? How many CIOs, CFOs, legal counsel? How many of these people can you really afford? Where it makes sense to have that kind of employee in the office. And the answer is only the very largest can have those large teams. And even then, it's questionable whether they can achieve best-in-class results with those in-house teams. Because once you go in-house, how long are you going to be a global expert? If all you see is one family, as opposed to seeing hundreds of families, can you even identify what best practices are? Do you know what the trends are? Is your expertise on top of the game because you're only dealing with one family in the countries that it happens to be in? So I would argue that this outsourcing is largely inevitable and benefiting greatly the consultants, the lawyers, the accountants, and all the outside investment managers, money managers, and wealth industry people. And I think that's a good thing. I think that outsourcing provides for a more robust platform for collaboration and gives the families a better chance to live and fight another day. They are trying to achieve in these enterprises some business discipline in particular, and to treat the family wealth management with the same level of running a discipline. And what that entails, relevant to us all, is that there are boards, and the boards have committees, and the boards have succession plans, and people are mentored and trained to step into slots. And one of the things that we've learned globally is that no family is likely to live on for more than a few generations without the ability to pull in outsiders. Even the wealthiest families on the planet, when there is no family member suitable for a role, they will go outside for the CEO, for the CIO, for the general counsel, whoever they need. And that willingness to bring in outside experts into the family enterprises, the family businesses, family offices, family holding companies, is one of the key requirements. There's a great book written by Ron Chernow, who's a wonderful, meticulous historian author. He wrote Grant, for example, and years earlier, he wrote Titan about the Rockefellers, and talked in particular about the level of discipline they implemented and the fact they would bring in outsiders. Some of the families we work with, anyone who wants to be in the family business starts at the very bottom. It doesn't matter if you're college educated, you're sweeping the floors and loading the trucks and working your way up. And if you're in a tie with a non-family member, these are anti-nepotism provisions. Unless you're the clear winner, you lose. So if you tie with an employee, you don't get promoted. So it's meritocracy added with the benefits of family education and giving your family members every chance to move forward, but they're not going to move beyond their level. They're not going to move beyond their capabilities and qualifications. And that's one of the key elements to both family businesses, family foundations, family offices, family holding companies surviving. One of the other things driving a lot of activity recently are some of the confiscatory tax policies around the globe. As you've seen, taxes continue to escalate beyond reason in many countries. Have 70+% tax rates. It's almost like a government taking a property without due process, where they just nationalize your business and it ceases to exist and disappears. And we represent families who've had those experiences, and that's not something they ever want to go through again. So when the taxes get so confiscatory that people find them objectionable, then you've got some real problems. You've got some stability problems, lack of confidence in the system. So in the US, we're currently about a 40% income tax. Then add your state or territory taxes on top of that, which range from 0 to 14%. The number could be quite onerous. Here in Illinois, we are the highest overall taxing state in the United States, and it's painful. And despite that fact, and being the fourth wealthiest state, we are the most bankrupt state because our politicians are so completely irresponsible. We're only I guess we just moved up from third to the second most corrupt state, but we've been the most corrupt city for about 16 years. So those of us in Chicago, we've been very proud of Al Capone and the legacy that he left behind. I'd like to think that'll change in my lifetime, but I'm not so sure. But as the tax rates escalate, families are willing to spend more and more time preserving their capital, and they often view the tax hit as a dink on alpha. So in effect, effective tax planning, again, VAT tax planning, payroll tax planning, income tax planning, estate tax planning actually adds to their alpha, and they view it as such. There's a family in particular, the most effective I've ever seen at this. They're in the $600 million neighborhood, but there's only 4 or 5 family members, so a relatively small family. And they have a tax committee, and the tax committee meets every quarter, and they bring in the 3 outside counsel firms, the in-house counsel, the 2 outside accounting firms, and we're all sitting there at dinner the night before and a full day meeting with the family, and they ask incredibly probative questions. What are you thinking about telling your clients next quarter that you haven't rolled out yet? What have you done for yourself that you haven't told us about? What do you think is too risky for us that you withheld and not filled us in on? Of all the planning you've seen from our other advisors, what's the softest spot? What would you fix and change? I've never seen anything quite like it. It certainly puts you on the spot. And that family spent approximately $14 million over a 10-year period on lawyers and accountants to counsel their various businesses, enterprises, and individuals. And without anybody dying, the net savings in that same time period was over $40 million. So the payback, quite dramatic, not quite 3 to 1, but very significant. So in addition to the typical distribution, governance, philanthropy committee, having a tax committee can prove to be a very effective approach. The current US proposals that came out of the Biden administration, if enacted, will result in many estates paying 90 to 95% in taxes. And I can assure you that the vast majority of Americans, entrepreneurs, do not find that acceptable. So we'll see how it ultimately plays out. But we are already experiencing massive taxpayer flight out of high tax states to low tax states that tend to be far more fiscally responsible and have surpluses versus the 10 most bankrupt states are all run by the same party. They don't comply with the law. They're wildly bankrupt. They're responsible, and they're attended with huge government, none of which are effective. But if that trend continues, we'll have more people leaving the country, almost to the numbers that we saw leave under Obama, which more people left under Obama than have left the country since the Pilgrims landed. It was the waterfall event of my lifetime. And if these current tax proposals go through, you'll see an even bigger escalation, out of the US. And that means public companies, private companies, family holding companies, trusts, and then lastly, individuals. By the time the individuals leave, everything else is already gone. So people will tend to move the assets, the businesses, the foundations, the trusts, the family holdcos. They leave first. And by the time the individuals change residency, it's already done. It's too late. The jobs, the taxes, the impact on the economy will already be felt. The types of family offices being used vary. And there's really three recognized types. So let me start with one that isn't officially recognized, but exists quite commonly. And the estimate in the States is that the embedded family office is perhaps as large as 15% of all US family offices. So this embedded family office is attended with problems because in most countries, you're violating about a dozen laws, breaches of fiduciary duty, tax laws, other things. There are a number of articles on this topic, but I wrote one in particular for trust and estates that talks about using a family office entity as a defensive purpose to avoid all of those problems with an operating company. I'll provide all those materials to the Institute, and you're free to circulate them as appropriate. One on family office structures, one on global virtual family offices from the International Family Office Journal, and this one on using family offices for defensive measures was published in the US and Trust and Estates. So this embedded family office is a bad idea. It's very difficult for it to be compliant. And the problem is when you go to exit that company, that family business, public or private, what you have, and the US is not the only place this is happening. This is a sport in Korea. This is happening in parts of Asia, parts of Europe. When you have all the personal family things inside the company, every time you pay your assistant to book your personal vacation, you're using corporate resources for a personal purpose. Securities violation, fiduciary duty violation, contract violation, usually qualified plan, ERISA, pension plan violation. I mean, the list goes on and on. And now you go to exit and you've got to sign standard warranties and representations, which you cannot sign without perjuring yourself. I've not breached my fiduciary duty. You have. I've not violated ERISA or our pension laws. You have. I've not violated employment contracts. I have. And so it puts you in a very difficult spot. You almost have no choice but to remedy all of these things before an exit, particularly if the exit involves the public markets. If you're going to reverse merge into a public company or conduct an IPO or be acquired by a public company, these things need to be fixed. And it's far easier and cheaper to fix them sooner rather than later. So I am not a fan of this embedded model, notwithstanding its global popularity. So the three recognized entities in our virtual family offices, legally organized just like a single family office, but where most of the services are outsourced. The single family office itself, which means an office that typically has a number of employees and staff and may outsource quite a bit. So on the virtual family office size, they could start as small as $25 million in AUM. Most of them are probably 50 to 250 million in assets under management. The single family office typically starts at 100 million up to infinite dollars. And the multifamily offices, most are started by a billionaire family. So they typically have $1 billion under management before they begin. Not all, but that's the most common model. So the virtual family office typically has 3 or fewer employees. You know, there may be an investment person or a lawyer or a CEO, but most of the services are outsourced. And even in the largest single family offices, outsourcing continues, to grow. There are family offices in downtown Chicago that occupy, 35,000 square feet floors of major office buildings. And there's one that occupies about 6 floors. So they are massive operations, as big as many public companies in their pursuits and scope of what they're trying to do. The multifamily office is actually technically defined in the US by statute, and it literally means serving more than one family. And by that, we have under US law the ability to identify a patriarch, and then all of the descendants of that family, all the lineal descendants, are considered part of that family. If you define it as the brother, then it includes all the descendants of that brother. So a multifamily office is typically two or more unrelated families, but they could be in the same family, but have defined their patriarchs differently. And in the US, there were about 30 of these 25 years ago. I'm sorry, in North America, there are about 30 in total. And now in North America, there are over 130. And some of them have 10, $15 billion in assets, and some of them are much more modest, $1 billion in assets and getting going. But all of those models have been proliferating. And in fact, they're collaborating more and more. Families are doing deals with each other. So the single family offices are working with the virtual family office, or virtual working with the multifamily offices. Single and virtual offices are cherry picking multifamily offices for what they're best at, their deals, their administration. Maybe they have 20 analysts on staff so they can do private equity, real estate, more sophisticated transactions than a smaller family might be able to accomplish. These structures then, we talk about the family businesses as operating businesses. The family office is also an operating business. And in fact, we talk about it, though it's a single entity, and often it is not a single entity. It could be as many as, the most I've seen is 7. I don't think we currently have any clients that have more than 4 of these entities in place, but think of the primary organization, what I would call the family office, is really the control entity. The entity that has control over all the investments, all the businesses, and the trustees. That's the control entity. That typically runs the show. It quarterbacks whatever is going on in the field. Then down below that could be a private trust company. Many families have private trust companies, and some of these private trust companies have grown into the biggest trust companies in the world. Bessemer Trust, Northern Trust started out as family private trust companies. You could have a subsidiary family office. So a family based in Uruguay might have a New York office or a Texas office as a subsidiary, or a family might be based in Toronto, Canada, and have another subsidiary office, in Bermuda. So it's not uncommon to have offices in the places where family has a lot of residents and or where its operating companies tend to be. The families could have a registered investment advisor or a broker dealer or the international equivalents of those entities. You could have a captive property and casualty insurance company. That would be pretty typical. Often there's a real estate property manager to isolate the liability of running operating real estate from the passive investments that the family may own. So the structure could be quite complex, although everyone talks about just as, quote, the family office. It could be a number of entities. The best structure on the planet, regardless of where one is situated or what each country calls these entities, is the family office control entity running one or more family holding companies. And these holding companies take different shapes in different countries. They are LLLPs. They are family limited partnerships. They are family limited liability companies, family series limited liability companies. They're called different things in different countries, but in effect, they tend to be non-liability for purposes of the investors. And the operations are limited in liability for the people that are running them, yet they are conduits for tax purposes, which typically means no federal entity level tax, although there may be state, province, territory taxes lobbed on top of that. The major taxes typically are not present in those enterprises. The overall structure then that is dominant in North America, and for that matter, Europe, is that quarterback or control family office running those holding companies, and in turn, all the holding companies are owned in trusts. Why are they in trusts? Privacy, stay off the radar screen. Someone can stand up and look out for you when you can't do it for yourself. Some controls reporting, and the highest fiduciary duty that exists in common law countries. And so you've got someone who does the wrong thing with the trust is going to be spending some time in prison. So it's just a bad spot for bad players, and those duties are very, very serious. It's even more important because many countries, when it charges an estate or a death tax in effect of some sort, or transfer tax, depending on what they call it, they all look alike. They're taxes on death. And when those taxes are assessed, if you don't go through a structure like a trust or some statutory regime that keeps you out of probate, which is public record judicial supervision of the estate administration process, all your information becomes public, which means anyone can either go to the city hall or the county seat or online in some countries and territories or provinces and see everything you had and who got it. That's a very bad spot for an affluent family. Now you're going to be subject to hostage and kidnapping, cyber hackers, gold diggers, salespeople, thieves, con artists. It's the last thing you want for your family. You want to be off that radar screen. And if it goes through a trust, that information is public only to the government tax authorities and not to the general public, where I could walk downtown, pick up a file and see all the things somebody owned and where they were. So the importance of having these trusts for privacy and confidentiality have simply expanded and become much more critical in the current world we live in. And this general vilification of wealth, this is an ongoing thing. This isn't back to, McCarthyism, when the communists were running rampant in the States. This goes to everyone's fear that the have-nots in a democratic society will start to vote themselves entitlement, and that's the beginning of the end of the society. And so it's very problematic that when you start vilifying people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, people are giving away almost their entire fortune to charity and trying to change the world. They're my heroes, yet they're being vilified. They're the fat cats, like someone dropped the money, a pot of gold in their backyard. That didn't happen. These people took unbelievable risks, were highly educated, survived, suffered, couldn't eat. Their first two wives left them. The families estranged. What these entrepreneurs go through is unbelievable. And I've seen it so many times in my career, and I've become a real fan and very appreciative of what people have to do to take those risks and build these companies and create jobs for the betterment of the rest of us. It just doesn't seem right to me to confiscate all of their assets in one fell swoop. So this structure will, I believe, do the best to preserve your wealth and minimize issues. The key objectives, besides minimizing taxes of every type and maintaining control and having succession and education, which drive these, there are significant income tax benefits in most countries, certainly in the US and Canada, that you can't get any other way. There are significant estate tax benefits, including discounting in the family holdcos. The idea being, quite simply, the IRS, US Treasury, wrote these rules for us. And in effect, it says if you have a majority of a business, you're entitled to a premium. So the business might be worth $1 million. You have 51%. They're going to value your premium at 600,000 or 700,000. So the value will be greater than the percentage represented. The same is true with a minority, where you have no control, you have no liquidity. Maybe your interest is only worth 70% of what you thought it was worth because you have no control and nobody will buy it. I wouldn't give you 20 cents on the dollar for that interest. I have no control. I might never get liquid. And worse, you could sprinkle phantom income to me and never make a distribution. Very bad spot for a minority owner to be in. So these discounts are justified, but the discounts offset the taxes at death, whatever they're called: inheritance tax, estate tax, gift tax, transfer tax, failure of step up in basis. There's a number of ways to get there, or any combination of those taxes. The importance of having trust as owners, again, privacy and confidentiality, and someone who can step up and do what you would have done for your family when you're not there. And in these trusts, it's increasingly important for them to be discretionary trusts, because not only in the States, but certainly in the States, many family law courts will look at what are non-marital assets for divorce purposes, clearly non-marital. And they will say, because you're almost certainly going to get them, we're going to treat them like marital assets anyway, which is a fiction, unconstitutional, unlawful, in my opinion, but most states are doing that. And they will invade those family trusts with mandatory distributions, which were the most common in North America. They would say, give my child a third at 40, a third at 45, and the balance at age 50. And because those payouts are certain, the marital courts can invade them and distribute them to divorcing spouses. So one of the keys to this structure is those family holdcos, we would only park them in 13 international jurisdictions or 2 US states. And those are jurisdictions that limit the remedies to a charging order, which is a very soft lien, does not give you access to books and records. You do not get ownership. You have no vote. You have no right to attend meetings. You're held at bay, and the family is in a far better position to live and fight another day by dealing with you, negotiating with you, as opposed to you pulling the rug out from under them and cherry picking your best assets, then giving you your company back after it's been gutted. So the structure of those holdcos are critical for asset protection planning and for marital planning as well, which is quite foreseeable. If the family's goal is to make sure that wealth goes to their own grandchildren, their lineal descendants, then these are the kind of things that families are quite involved in and put a lot of effort into maintaining. Governance is a key part of these structures, just like it is of any business. There are often staggered boards, requirements to be on the boards. Families may have a written constitution, which talks about who they are, what they believe in, or family bylaws, and they have rules of how everything works. In some cases, for families, at about the 2-year mark, we give them a big binder called a compliance policies and procedures binder, so that as they go through and identify their practices, how's the annual family meeting going to run? Are we going to pay for people's airfare and hotel, or do they have to get there themselves? What's the agenda? Who's invited? Are spouses that married into the family invited? What is the annual reporting going to look like? Who's entitled to that package and what do they get? How about beneficiaries that aren't yet vested? Do they get anything or do they get nothing until they're vested? So those decisions are made and recorded. And one of the keys to not getting sued and running a family business or a family office is treating people the same. So once you've identified a procedure and you record it, you continue following that procedure. And if you change it, you can change it. You just have to explain the justification, have it documented. So in the same way that a corporate board does not want to be sued and spend half of its board service in depositions, family office board doesn't want the same problem as well. And they will often get called in divorce, child custody proceedings, because they want to inflame the judge and jury with the magnitude of the wealth. So it becomes increasingly important to keep the courts and the public out of that private information. The other things that families often use are a family council that kind of determines the personal things, the meetings, how the family education is conducted, how many seminars are at the family meeting, who's invited. Then there's often a family assembly where the family gets together and decide what they want to do. And they also have processes surrounding philanthropy. Where's the money going to go? Why are they going to get it? And they often engage grandchildren in this process. They're often given a small amount of money, and they've got to get up and explain who they're giving it to, why they're giving it to them, and the justification for the gift. It's a wonderful training ground, both in speaking before a group and learning Robert's Rules of Orders, how to conduct a professional meeting or a board meeting. Those are valuable skills for children, and they'll often become even more valuable when they get to college, because many college entities, fraternities, sororities, clubs, organizations require Robert's Rules of Order. So the students that don't know it before they get there are at a disadvantage. They're trying to figure out what's going on and navigate the rules, which can be somewhat complex. And then one of the other key benefits in these entities is that because there are often family members inside the family businesses and the family offices, in some cases only family members inside the family offices, they are a great place to park benefits, executive compensation, perquisites, qualified plans, and pensions, largely because the rules that typically are anti-discriminatory that force a business to cover all of its employees, in this case, work to the benefit of the family. So the family office would get a deduction for these benefits, or if there's no deduction, the benefits are not taxable to the individual, or it's an executive comp strategy where part of it's taxable to the employee, but the full benefit is not really captured. And so just like any other sophisticated or mature operating business, all of those structures are fair game as well. So for all these reasons, the industry expects continued proliferation of family offices. The greatest proliferation is probably going on in Asia and the US based on available data. In particular, China is forming family office associations. There are 2 in Singapore now. There's been a couple in Europe for a long time. There are now 6 in the US. 30 years ago, there were 2. And so I believe that every type of family office will continue to proliferate. They will be dealing with the exact same businesses exact same issues as operating businesses and companies. And the more discipline that's employed in their use, the better educated the family, and the more likely that family is to preserve its wealth and have a meaningful impact on philanthropy, creating jobs, building wealth, and helping the countries in which they're resident. And I've been almost shocked to see how many. So we've worked with well over 300 single family offices at this point, and I'm shocked at how much of this wealth is being given away. In many cases, I think we have 13 clients that signed the giving pledge, but most of them are giving away 100%. They're not just giving away half, they're giving away 100% different charities around the globe, trying to make the world a better space. And in some cases, these people are in their 70s, they're working 60-hour weeks, they're killing themselves, and they've already made the decision they're not giving any money to their own children and grandchildren. It's all going to foundations and public charities. So we all have a vested interest in doing everything we can to help these people and make them more efficient, because money that goes through the charitable platforms tends to be far more efficient than the same benefits delivered by government. It doesn't go through the bureaucracy. The warlord can't steal it. You're just in a better position to affect a positive outcome. So I'm a big fan of these type of family enterprises. I think they'll continue to proliferate, and it's in all of our best interests to do everything we can to help them, because the key beneficiaries of family offices are us. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments that people have.
Thank you very much, Tom. I know we started a few minutes late, so I am so happy to have your indulgence. And I would like to ask our moderator for this session, CCGI Director, Camille Facey, that she will take it over from here with you. Camille?
Thank you.
Yes, Thomas, that was brilliant. We have been properly schooled. Yes.
Well, I'm an adjunct professor at a couple of law schools, and I've been teaching lawyers and CPAs and CFAs for over 30 years. So if I don't know this by now, we're all in trouble.
Well, Tom, I think you're going to have to come back and start at a lower level for us here in the Caribbean.
Sure.
Because so much of that information was absolutely new, and it reinforced for me the need for continuous education, because governance and these issues evolve. They're constantly evolving. Now, you referred to 11 jurisdictions, or was it 13 international jurisdictions where
13.
persons would, okay. Which are some of those jurisdictions? Do we have any of them in the Caribbean?
Sure. So in fact, places like St. Kitts, Nevis, Bermuda, I think 3 or 4 of the jurisdictions are in the Caribbean. And so some jurisdictions under English common law tradition limit remedies to charging orders through case law. And we don't trust case law, because case law could have changed by the end of this conversation. So we typically limit those jurisdictions, those that have it by statute. So in the states, for example, Alaska and Delaware, but I want to say 6 or 7 states provide for charging order exclusivity by case law, but only Alaska and Delaware have it by statute. And it specifically says it is the only available remedy. Because it's baked into the statute, the judiciary doesn't have the ability to circumnavigate it or otherwise avoid that provision. And if people can use other remedies, they're going to freeze the assets. They're going to have a temporary restraining order or permanent injunction. They're going to use laches. They're going to create a constructive trust. The bottom line is they can use your money against you and protect your family from having access to its own money, even if it's a potentially fraudulent or spurious claim. By the time we figure that out, we could be 6 months to a year into it, and you're out hundreds of thousands of legal fees. So the importance of keeping people out of family businesses, family offices, and other family structures is really rather important. And there are a couple of treatises that talk about like the top 40 international jurisdictions. And they will go through and identify some of the things, maybe perhaps not that level of detail, but it gives you a pretty good start of where the colorable jurisdictions are. And as you know, there are Caribbean jurisdictions that are excellent for captive insurance companies. There are those jurisdictions that are expert for life companies. There are good financial jurisdictions. There's top asset protection jurisdictions. We tend to cherry pick the jurisdiction for what it's best for. And so here are 3 or 4 of the very top jurisdictions in the world for this purpose. For a family office, they're not looking for what is everybody else doing. They're looking for, how do I optimize this? Where is the very best place for me to be and why? And that has changed over time. So, Bahamas was at the top of the list years ago. They're still the top of the list for other things, but they're not a particularly strong as protection jurisdiction. There are other jurisdictions that have enacted better laws since then that over time people will likely emulate to be competitive for that type of work as well.
Yes, okay, colleagues, please raise your hand or put questions in the chat. Tom, that was a very enlightening answer. Now, how does all of this tie in with the situation that we find ourselves in the Caribbean now, where some of us are put on gray lists? And I mean, it's like sometimes we can't even open a bank account here because of all the disclosures that are being required, or laws are being amended to show beneficial ownerships. Does that impact what it is that you're describing to us?
It does a great deal. And in fact, the global trend is that governments are becoming increasingly more intrusive and requiring information that's almost mind-numbing. So to give you a sense of that, and that's everywhere. That's the US. So like in Europe, the Eurozone uses LEI numbers, and it's a way to provide transparency of corporate entities, right? So they then know who are the beneficial owners, who are the directors, who are the officers, provides information that typically would be limited to tax authorities or a court, right? So all that becomes public information, or at least shared among every government agency of given countries. In the US, Dodd-Frank specifically says our securities entity is forced to share information with all the other government entities. So whatever they come across immediately goes out to everybody else. I don't view that as very comforting as an American. You've seen what these people do. They lied all about the Russian investigation of Trump was complete fiction. They all lied about it. The FBI was involved. The CIA was involved. It's unprecedented collusion using government agencies for political purposes. I am aghast and angry at what's transpiring. And the thought that we're going to put more trust in these people by giving them information horrifies me. I do not want them to have my information. And I've done everything I can to stay off the radar screen as much as possible, which for me is hard. I criticize the IRS often, so I get audited on a regular basis. But I'm prepared for them, so it's all good. So I think this trend is ongoing and escalating. And the best example I could give you, so first of all, those LEI numbers, not only a lot of US family offices and companies are required to use them, even though they're not technically in the Eurozone. Right now, Canada, Mexico, and the United States have formed a committee or a group to study requiring more and more American businesses to have LEIs, perhaps even family holding companies, which is another registration, another filing with a bunch of data nobody wants to give up and time nobody wants to spend. So the FATCA does that. The Global Common Reporting system does that. Know Your Customer does that. Dodd-Frank does that. So it's moving up, it's moving in the wrong direction, and we're all in much the same boat. And so I advise people, do whatever you can to stay off the radar screen. Never use your family name in your entities, not in the business, not in the holding company, not in the family office, not in the trust. I had a trust called the 1503 Trust. And that was an address of an apartment I had in the city. Doesn't mean anything to anybody. So if they look at it, they don't know that that's Tom Handler's personal trust. Similarly, my family holdco is called Pelham Partners. Nobody knows that it could be a private equity fund, could be a hedge fund, could be a venture capital fund. No one's going to know that's my family holdco. But if you put what I've actually seen people do, the Jim Jones Tax Avoidance Family Limited Partnership, not the best thing to put on your tax return or have the judge pull up when they're looking at your documents in a subpoena. You want to stay off the radar screen as much as you can at a time when all of the governments are pressing for more information, becoming more invasive, and sharing information among themselves and on a global basis in an unprecedented fashion. The result has been, we could do an international asset protection trust 25 years ago, and it would probably cost $50,000 to $55,000 for everything. The trust, the trip down there, these are 80-page complex trusts. interviewing the trustees, interviewing the trust protector, hiring them and funding them, and going through all the know your customer and the US and whatever foreign country compliance we were in. That exact same trust today, I would say the last 6 or 7 that we've done were between 175,000 and 225,000. And one of them took 19 months for a self-made American worth about 600 million with no record whatsoever. We just got bombarded with paperwork, and the man owns 100+ businesses. I mean, it was really very painful. That does not encourage us to go back to that jurisdiction or to go through that process again, because it was so damn painful. And there's no premium on that fee. That's just the cost of my people doing the work, which they've done hundreds of times. Nobody was learning in that process. These are people that have done this before, just carrying it out and executing. No research, no thinking, no nothing, just putting it in place. So that level of compliance and paperwork is ridiculous.
Yeah, Tom.
Camille,
Yes.
if I may ask
Yes,
a question.
Please.
So I agree with you. This was such a brilliant presentation and so wide ranging. There was a lot for us to learn. And in fact, I just want to say that Antonia Ferrier said in the chat that it was a brilliant contribution, and she's inspired to revisit her own bylaws as well. So Tom, I wanted to ask you, I mean, you've given us a lot of food for thought, but from your experience, what would you say we can do in the region to make this an attractive location for ultra high net worth individuals? Do we look at setting up family offices, or should we, because you spoke of the different types of entities, what can we do to maybe be even an attractive location for subsidiary, for as has been done by some of our other countries?
Sure. So I know that there have been several public and private initiatives in Bermuda, working on this, and there are quite a few family offices parked there. That's also true of a number of jurisdictions. Groups are trying to create sort of havens for family offices, which include, nice properties, amenities, good restaurants. But of course, they need to have, good financial laws, good communications. And I think the kinds of efficiencies that places like in the states, Delaware, Nevada, Wyoming, there are jurisdictions that are fairly streamlined, have laws that allow you to conduct business at lower cost. Many of them have banned juries, so you don't have to deal with 12 people who know nothing about the subject matter. So they've done things that better protect the business and streamline their operations. Those are very attractive. So those kinds of things are effective. And then if banking, trust, or asset protection is good there, those are big pluses. They encourage people to come as well. And I said, there's a number of treatises out there and even articles in technical journals. I remember that we looked at like 50 jurisdictions, including the entire Caribbean, and we ranked the jurisdictions from 1 to 25 on different purposes. What's best for banking and finance? What's best for hedge funds? What's best for asset protection, private property and casualty, captive insurance companies? And you can literally rank them. And we took a ton of time and effort, spent a lot of our own money doing this. And some darn firm in California went through the same deal with respect to asset protection, and they published their list in a magazine that almost all lawyers and accountants read. I was like, well, they just gave up a very valuable amount of research for nothing. But the good news is that the list, they almost overlaid. Like there maybe 2 countries swap spaces. It was almost the identical list to ours. So you can go through and look at the factors like, has a jurisdiction repealed the rule against perpetuities? Do you have some elements of asset protection? Is there a protective mechanism for trust? Can you register the trusts and minimize litigation in trusts, which is important to wealthy families? There's the Statute of Elizabeth repealed. There are like 30 factors you could look to and then ultimately come up with a conclusion with some relative measure of science to say where it kind of ranks in the pecking order. And so I think the jurisdictions have figured out, obviously some have figured out captives love it here, others figured out hedge funds love it here, private equity likes it here. People have their niche, but to be competitive globally, places like Isle of Man and Malta and Gibraltar, they're not as good, right? I mean, a lot of European law firms park things there for no particularly good reason. I mean, they're nice banking finance jurisdictions, but often there's no asset protection worth a damn. They're not good jurisdictions for hedge funds. Their regulatory regimes aren't what they need to be. And so the Caribbean should be well positioned to knock out some of those jurisdictions. And even worse than the European law firms in terms of just kind of willy-nilly picking these jurisdictions. I just shake my head and say, you picked this for asset protection. It's not on the top 30 list. You're not even close. If it's me, I want to be on the top 5 list, not number 37. They didn't do it at a level that they should have and could have. So you need to be good enough to be in the hunt. And you have the advantage of, you got better weather, scuba diving, sailing, boating, tennis, golf, all the good stuff that my client base enjoys a lot more than I do is kind of part of the deal. And you've already got, lovely resorts and, historic fishing resorts and things like that people will fly into. I was at one resort at South Andros, and I was there with a buddy of mine, and we were the only ones that didn't fly in our private jets because my buddy was cheap and, made me fly in the back of the bus. But you've already got the people down there. It doesn't take that much for them to start realizing that you've got financial centers and you'll streamline their ability to do business. I think all those things factor into it. These decisions tend to be pretty comprehensive. They're going to look at everything.
Camille, I have one more follow-up question.
Yes, okay.
Okay, which is to say, you also mentioned, by the way, I thought he was describing Jamaica perfectly just now, when he talked about having all the amenities and so to attract persons. But Tom,
yes, but I'll tell you, the World Bank and the EU, they have us under pressure, wanting us to pass all kinds of laws. And that's the challenge with the Caribbean right now, the pressure that we're feeling from external to the Caribbean.
Sure.
Yes, Kamala.
So I wanted to ask, you mentioned too that a part of what is happening with some of these families that they will give the younger generation the opportunity to grow by choosing where they may want to invest in philanthropy and all that. So that new generation, can you share with us what may be some of the things that they are looking for that we may be able to focus on to say, okay, let's then begin to work with this generation and build from there?
Well, I think the families that have been most successful historically around the world and the families that are currently positioned to continue to move forward successfully and accomplish their mission. We force every family we work with to either give us a mission, vision, values, objective statement, just a one-pager. Who are you? How do you live your lives? What's important to you? And everyone that works on that file, that's the first thing they read. So if they've never seen or heard of or met that family, they can get a quick look and go, okay, that allows you to dial in sort of the right range of alternatives, the right type of business, the right decisions, the right type of tax planning. I think that for purposes of being effective with the families, education is one of the key elements. And to the extent any institution or this institute offers those educational opportunities, it'll draw families. My oldest son, and I've encouraged my child, I'm no Rockefeller, but no one in my family expected me to be where we are. And my oldest son attended the Children of Wealth Conference hosted by Credit Suisse in New York on his own dime, which I thought was impressive. And I've made them all come to my sessions. We have meetings. They understand our structure enough not to mess it up when I die. Hopefully they're learning more as time goes on. And I've made them all work at my firm, everything from, stuffing Christmas cards to doing research and court appearances. So, when they weren't capable of doing much, then they were doing, emptying the garbage and doing minimal tasks, but education and giving them responsibility is one of the keys. And there've been several articles in the US lately saying, this trophy generation we created is a giant mistake. And the Wall Street Journal coined that phrase. It basically said, the kid could be on the last place soccer team and never play or do anything or make any contribution, but at the end of the year, he's entitled to a 3-foot trophy for participation. The regime I grew up in was quite the opposite of that. you'd kill yourself, you'd be the team captain, score the most goals, and you're lucky if you get a ribbon this big, at the end of the season, and nobody else got anything, as opposed to this trophy generation that is incredibly entitled, selfish, not particularly hardworking. They're problematic. I don't want them as employees. I don't want them around me. I don't understand who the hell they are. They are the farthest thing from our greatest generation that fought World War II than they could possibly be. Those selfless, sacrificing, loyal, patriotic, humble, highly qualified people compared to what we've been raising. And so it starts with your own family. You need to be able to say no and set boundaries and give children responsibility. You don't give them responsibility like you have $100 to give away. I want you to tell me what 3 charities you considered, which one you're going to give the money to and why, and even a 4-year-old can get up there and say, I saw Bambi's mother got shot. I want to preserve deer. I'm going to give money to the, National Forestry Institute to preserve land so the deer can live. Boom, right? What have they learned? The process, accountability. They made the decision on their own, and the family's out $100. Looks like a pretty darn smart investment to me. And as the family members get more senior, it's a proposal. Why should we give it to the March of Dimes? Why should we give it to Greenpeace? Why should we give it to the Audubon Society? Go through and justify this in a business-like manner so that down the road, when that child's no longer a teenager, he can make that same presentation to a board of directors where it might be life-changing. So the education is critical, and it's everything. It's reading, it's how the parents treat them, it's the discipline in the household. And largely, there's a book called The Gratitude Principle, written by a Canadian, Dan, his name eludes me for the time, but it basically says that people who are grateful every day for their existence and their family, their friends, their health, the blue sky around them are far happier, far more likely to have an impact, far more likely to help others, far more likely to enjoy their lives. If you wake up every day and you're grateful for what you have or don't have, you're moving in the right direction. So teaching children how fortunate they are to be alive, to be healthy, to have a family, it sounds pretty simple, but boy, that's the kernel that underlies this, and again, I've just been pleasantly shocked at how thoughtful and caring and charitable these families are. It's a privilege to work with them. It truly is. They are just amazing people. And they should be revered. It's the opposite of this vilification that's going on. It's because that's not who they are. No one dropped a pot of gold in their backyard. And if the data is correct, that only 10% of the wealth makes the 3rd generation, then everyone around us that we see that's wealthy, they did it themselves, right? 80% did it themselves on their own. I've seen people accumulate 4 and 5 billion in one lifetime. How do you accumulate 4 or 5 billion by the time you're 60 years old? Pretty darn hard to do. But I've seen it happen a bunch of times. And it's like, I've started giving up. People come in the office and hire us and tell me, look, we're not your biggest clients, but we're going to grow. I'm thinking, yeah, you're not going to go anywhere, but you're still a good client. And then 10 years later, they're billionaires and it happens. So they have a vision, a mission, and now they flip. And now it's not about making money. It's about stewardship. How do they give it away effectively? How do they have the biggest impact on the planet? And several of these families have no children, right? 100% is going to charities. So it's just great stuff. So I think as advisors and members of this industry, we can have a big role in helping these people be more efficient, do it even better. And again, the money given out into welfare benefits or social benefits through charities and foundations tends to be far more efficient than having going through governments and the bureaucracy, right? So if we want to help the most people most of the time, we're going to work on this private charity, private ESG. Not that the public isn't important and not that they don't accomplish a lot. I'm a huge fan of national parks and national forests and things like that. But for the most part, the private sector is much better at this.
Boy, Tom, that's great. And I mean, parenting and life advice, in addition to all the legal advice, what more could we have asked for? And I mean,
I'm not so sure, but it is really a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me. And I will send an email with those articles I mentioned. So if anybody has an interest, feel free just to circulate them there. I retain joint publication rights, so I can do whatever I want with them. So I will provide them and you can use them as appropriate.
Oh, that's fantastic. Kamala, do we have time to take one question more, or we do? All right.
If it's okay with Tom. Yes.
It's okay with you, Tom? You have 5 minutes to give us?
Of course.
Okay, so Andrew Govaya said, very insightful and a lot to take away. how best can someone learn more about pursuing a career path of educating themselves further to be able to enter this niche industry?
Well, that's a
and,
great.
and Tom, if I may just add the other question from Corey Gomez as well, which is absolutely excellent and would lead into our next panel. So you'll answer that and then address us with, he says, are you seeing more trusts trying to incorporate crypto into their portfolio to avoid the scrutiny? He said the development of blockchain technology may actually lead to different exchange systems to avoid government oversights. So both those questions, please. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'll start with the education. How do you get up to speed? One of the benefits of speaking at conferences is that I get to go to the conferences and listen to other speakers. And so I've always loved learning. I've been a perpetual student. I think anybody, in this space at a decent level is required to be. And it's fun, it's dynamic, it's interesting. These are not boring subjects. These things really affect the world. So I would say that there are great educational opportunities, conferences, virtual or otherwise, and that's a way to get up to speed on a lot of different topics. Some of these conferences are 2.5, 3 days long. So you've got tons of panels, tons of speakers, and you can learn a lot, and people disagree on occasion. That gives you different points of view. So I think they're very valuable to see what families are doing. And many of these organizations are either they're parts of family office associations, or they do great research. Either way, by the time they do the agenda and they pick the people, they've got the best speakers, they've got the top experts, and they've got the subjects the families want to hear, because otherwise the families won't come. So there are 4 or 5, so I'll call them generic conference educators that are really good at research and run good conferences. And they're based in London, New York. There are a number of these. And then the associations, they mentioned there's 6 in the US, the most recent, the Ultra High Net Worth Institute. They're building what I think will be the best ultra high net worth family office. I'm going to call it a library, but it's not just a library. It's documents, it's speeches, it's videos, it's radio interviews, but it's being vetted by independent panels of real experts. So my people have access to it. So if a young lawyer wants to read up on something, he can find the 4 best articles or chapters on family banks and know that they actually are the best because a committee of other experts already vetted them. So that's very valuable. And there's a book that was just updated 1.5, 2 years ago, and is from STEP, which is the International Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners. There are maybe 35, 40 articles. It's called the Family Office Handbook. I get no royalties out of it, by the way. I authored the chapter on virtual family offices, but I don't benefit in any way. STEP benefits, but it's a very good book with a lot of real experts, most of whom I know, with chapters on different areas that affect this industry. So think of it as a treatise almost on the family office space. I would think that type of book, and that's not the only one. Dr. Kirby Rosblock has a couple of great books on family offices. There are 4 or 5 out there that will not be hard to find in a basic search that kind of talk about the industry and would be very helpful to anyone interested in learning the area. That's probably the fastest way to get up to speed quick. And then from there, your interest will force you into other areas you want to look into. But I think those treatises that didn't exist, 25, 30 years ago, there was nothing. There was almost nothing published. There were no conferences. Unless you represented a family office, there was no way to learn anything because nobody knew where they were, what they were doing. They didn't share data. There was no research. So it's still a nascent industry, but it's come a long way and there's a lot more out there and available. And this idea of global best practices is beginning to take shape. And there are things that families have identified as global best practices, like the structure I mentioned, family banks, family foundations, international asset protection trusts. There's a load of things that have now stood out from the pack, and that'll continue to happen. And
the question on the crypto, that will be our last one.
Yeah, and I think that's very interesting. So first, we've done a surprising number of these deals. They are everywhere, and the amount that people hold is surprising to me. They've recently gotten hit pretty hard during the downturn, but that's somewhat expected because they're newer, so it doesn't surprise me. I don't think that reflects a long-term downturn. And yes, I believe that the idea of keeping your matters private from government is a good one. not for tax evasion, of course, you still have to pay your taxes, but to stay off the radar screen, I think is valuable. I'd rather not have people involved in my transactions or how I'm betting on it. And government people, they do insider trading all the time. I mean, how do these people that barely graduated college end up multimillionaires and they're making $90,000 a year in office? How do these congressmen that came out of hardware stores and bars and restaurants, who aren't competent to do that, suddenly, getting rich while in public office? I find it reprehensible, and I know exactly how it's being done. It's trading on inside information, influence peddling, all the things they're not supposed to do. So I like the idea of keeping it private. I believe what will happen is that a major currency, possibly even the US, will come out with its own cryptocurrency, and it'll dominate because it'll have the government backing. So I think crypto will continue to grow, and who the ultimate winners are is very hard to say. There will be more rules put around it, so it'll get a little harder to keep it as private as you'd like. But ultimately, I think some sovereign is more likely to pick a cryptocurrency that becomes the standard or stays the standard if the US does it, than is for crypto to become a global standard on its own. But you never know. That's a real possibility as well.
Yes, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, it's left for me to thank Tom for his brilliant, enlightening, and transformative, I may say, presentation. It certainly transformed how I see a lot of these issues. Tom, thank you for taking the time this morning. We are students at your feet, and we look forward to getting all of that information.
Well, we are all students at each other's feet, absolutely. And I think that collaboration is critical, and we all learn from each other. And anyone who thinks they did it by themselves is delusional. So I'm a big fan of being part of a team, and I appreciate the time that you've given me. Thank you all for hosting me. And if I can help you in any way, I'm happy to do that. But I'll start off by sending these articles. So if anybody wants to dig a little deeper on these topics, they're written for lay people. So these are not overly, some are a little technical, but they're not bad. You could wade through it with some boots.
Ladies and gentlemen, give him a big round of applause. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.